I get it, guys. I get it. And gals, I get it. Why you're like, I don't want to do this anymore. I'm tired of doing this. But think about this. You're flying across the world at 6+ miles per hour in a tin can. There's less than 1% of you that gets to do this for a living, which is so cool. Welcome to the Wiser Retirement Podcast. Pilots, are you curious about how retiring early could affect your benefits? I'm Casey Smith. Today I'm joined with Shauna Theriault, one of our pilot specialists. Each week we bring you practical advice on retirement, investing, planning for your financial future. Don't forget to subscribe to our podcast wherever you're listening. Let's get started, Shauna.
Absolutely. Good morning.
Good morning. So, we do a lot of pilot plans, and I like doing a podcast dedicated to our pilot client base, which is large and rapidly growing.
Yeah.
And you and I both come across situations where people say, hey, plan me to 55. I went out earlier. Plan me to 50, which some of these young people could probably pull off. I thought we would just do a quick little episode on pilots retiring early because, well, there's many reasons why you would not want to retire early, in my opinion. But sometimes to walk in someone else's shoes is very different than walking in our own shoes, watching them do that, right? Leaving your family to 15 days out of the month to travel is different to do it, right? I learned a long time ago when I was a pilot that flying a Boeing 777 to Japan or someplace far away sounds really cool. Doing it is totally different on your body.
I'm sure.
and on my, when we were doing speaking engagements back in the day about exchange traded funds, which had not been created in Asia yet, I did a couple of treks across that side of the pond, and I quickly realized that my body is not cut out for massive time change.
You've said that on multiple occasions, actually.
Yes, if I had moved on to a major airline, I would have been the guy flying up and down the East Coast only. That's what my body likes. So let's talk about this for a second. Here's my biggest concern is being an airline pilot. It can be very busy. You pick up extra trips. You're flying your assigned line that you get, but it could also be the best part-time job ever. Mm-hmm. And in some scenarios, at some airlines on some airplanes, you have the ability to hide out. You have the ability to maybe do some ALPA work, some management type work that keeps you home on the same time zone, more of a 9 to 5 kind of a thing, right?
Yeah.
So before you say, I want to be out, maybe you find a place that you don't have to fly as much. And I know it at United, Delta, somewhat at American, you can drop a lot of trips. You can drop down. If someone's willing to take your line, and you're senior enough to have the good line that people will say, hey, I'll take that. You can drop down to maybe doing a trip a month, maybe a 3-day, 4-day, once a month. And your pay's going to come way down, but you have to look at it as you're just part-time retired.
Right.
And while you're part-time retired, you're still getting the next year at Delta would be 18% contribution into the 401k plan.
Exactly.
17% in other places. So you're still getting the defined contribution into the 401k plan. I mean, if you were making $450 a year, that's probably roughly
$80,000.
Yeah, $81,000 at 18% that you're walking away from. Now that's probably working your normal line. It would be less than that if you worked less. Also, too, if you were disabled, you definitely would not be quitting. Right. Most airlines are still contributing into your 401k plan, the defined contribution on your old pay, right?
Right.
And you're collecting a paycheck until you're 65. So I would say you just need to be cautious and understand what it is, why it is that you want to do this.
Well, and plus, you have to think about the biggest thing is health insurance, right? So if you think about it as, even if you're working that part-time scenario you're talking about, now they're contributing that 18%. Mm-hmm. So you're not drawing from your portfolio for living expenses, maybe, depending on what your spending is, but maybe you have that part-time income. And maybe that does cover your expenses. So now you're not drawing, but you also have health insurance.
Right.
So that's huge for you and your spouse.
Because let's talk about that. Health insurance
Yeah.
prior to 65 can get very expensive.
Completely. So you have to get private insurance, or you can go through the exchange. And there are subsidies in place, and you may qualify for them depending on your other income, or the government has, given some subsidies to help pay for that and offset some of the costs, but it may be very costly for you. So now you're withdrawing from your portfolio, and you're paying, and it has to last you longer because you retired earlier. And now you're paying for health insurance. Honestly, I feel like, and I don't know if you see this, this is what I see. I see a lot of pilots that come in and they're like, okay, let me see what it looks like at age 55. And they can do it.
Yep.
I mean, they can do it, but the reality is most of them don't. Just like you're describing, because they could go to, a lot of times they get to 65 and they don't want to stop.
Yeah,
It's like they want the age to go beyond.
A lot of people hoping for age 67. That didn't happen.
Exactly. So, you could be retirable, but you have to think about all the other things that go with it.
So let's put a number to that. So in order to get the subsidy, you're going to have to keep your income below 70,000.
Yeah.
For your family, for healthcare. So think about that. You're retired, but you can't live on more than $70,000 in taxable income. If you have brokerage money, you can always pull that out, obviously.
Which is an argument to have brokerage money. But you have to look at all of it, because dividends, interest, capital gains on that.
Right.
And so, I've been in a situation where someone retired and they had millions in retirement account, $5 million. And they had some brokerage money, and it wasn't a ton, and they were getting subsidies. And so we literally put this in a non-interest bearing account, because it was only a few $100,000 that they had, which is not insignificant, but we couldn't get enough, cash flow on it to warrant the subsidies they were getting,
right?
If we were investing in stocks, et cetera, because it was such a small amount to be invested. So many pilots have a lot in brokerage money. And so it really depends on what the income is from that.
Yeah, I would say if you were trying to retire early, I wouldn't be doing like mega backdoor Roths at that point. I would just be putting everything into brokerage account, anything extra. Yeah. You still want to try to max out the 401k the normal way. But you want that flexibility at that point. You don't want to have to have everything locked into your retirement account. Or have to do a 72T,
right?
Where you have to take substantial and equal payments over 5 years, or until age 65, whichever's longer, right?
Yeah.
So
you can do that to access it without penalty. That's not a problem, but still, yeah.
Yeah, it limits you though, if you needed extra money, right?
Absolutely.
So I don't know. I would just want to start the conversation off saying, hey, I would just be careful. I think other things that you have to think about is life insurance. Hopefully, if you've done your retirement planning, you can retire at 55,
and you don't need life insurance.
Hopefully, you won't need life insurance, right? But if you are trying to limp it along, and life insurance closes the gap if something happens to you, then your life insurance would not stay with you in a group setting. If you did the GVUL policies that most of the airlines have now, then you could pay for it to be ported. But can you really afford that at that point?
Yeah.
That's a lot of money.
It is
to port that out. Let's talk about travel benefits. Have you been at the airline long enough? Are you old enough to check the box that you can use your travel benefits if that's what you're trying to do? So you want to double check what your airline's policy is on that kind of retirement. I think most of them, years of service and 55 typically will check a box.
Yeah.
But I would not want to be surprised and find out that you didn't get any travel benefits when you walked away.
Absolutely.
When you think about people who say they want to retire early, you just made a comment that kind of jogged my memory. Very often we will run that, hey, can I retire early number? But it's also psychologically so much easier to go do something when you know you don't have to do it.
Right. It kind of puts a different pep in your step if you're I'm retirable. I'm coming here because I want to, not because I have to.
Exactly.
It kind of changes your perspective a little bit.
Right. When you know that you can just walk away. And I would say in the airline world, for pilots, things are more stressful now. There aren't as many one leg, 2 leg trips, at least on the narrow bodies. That what this is just working with hundreds of people tell me. It's in our world. It was at the regional level. We would do 4, 5, 6, 7 legs in a day, and then get minimum night rest and go down the next day and do it again. And some of that efficiency, probably the proper term to use, has come to the majors where it didn't used to be that way. And so you're working harder. It used to be, at least in the Delta system, 7.5, 7.6, there was an international side, there was a domestic side. Now it's all mixed in, so you can do pretty much anything. And so that creates more wear and tear. If one day you're here, next day you're way over there.
Right.
Just different type schedules. And then also now, just looking at recent news, there's some new people in charge of the FAA. And after this recent Southwest go around, which is normal with a flex jet taxiing across the runway, the captain did his job. He said, "Oh, there's something on the runway. I'm going to go around." It happens all the time. And yet this becomes sensationalized after the last two crashes. But what the FAA director came out and was like, "Hey, if any pilot violates anything, they're going to have their license revoked immediately." Well, that doesn't really produce a culture of safety.
It's a fear, right?
Yes. And you have to understand that it's not a whole lot different than driving your car. You drive your car every day. You get complacent. When you're a new driver, you got two hands, 10 and 2. You're driving down the road, and you're just like, okay, I'm a new driver. I'm not going to mess this up. What? Probably 6 months, but let's just say, for example, 2 years later, you're eating a burger. You got a client on your cell phone. You get the knee holding the car. And aviation is not exactly like that, but you do get complacent because it's routine. It's over and over and over and over again, one leg after another, right?
Yeah.
And so we're human, and mistakes tend to happen. And so this would add more job pressure to people, where they're like, oh my gosh, like if I screw up, I may be out of my livelihood, which will kind of clash with the unions and how all that works, and even loss of license. We think medical, but loss of license might have to be something else.
Yeah,
might need different type of insurance if that even exists. I don't know.
Hey fellow aviators, before we dive back into this episode, I've got some awesome news to share. On our website, we've got a freebie just for you. Our team of financial advisors has done the legwork to provide you with free 401k allocations for all the major airlines. Getting your hands on your airline's specific allocation is a breeze. Just click the link in the episode notes or head over to pilotretirement.com. Now let's get back to the good stuff in this episode.
This is an old story that usually I don't think I've ever told too many pilot stories on the podcast, but there's this old story that this is one of my last flights, and there was a very senior Delta captain jump seating, and he was riding to Charleston, South Carolina, and this was to kind of put. I was at Atlantic Southeast Airlines, and when we got sold by Delta, we started flying for other airlines. So I was actually working a United flight that was going from Dulles to Charleston. So this guy was jump seating for whatever reason. I don't know how he got there, but he was there. And he says, I'm retiring. This is 10 years ago, because I'm retiring at just the right time. He's like, I've been flying the same route, which for those of you who are not in aviation, pilots do not fly the same route over and over. Unless you're in like the top 1% and you get to bid first on what you want, that is a possible thing. But he liked flying the flight to Greece, Atlanta to Greece. And he'd been doing this for years. And of course, the flight attendants who were super senior, who are probably like our grandma's age, they also liked doing this flight. And so they all kind of gravitated over the years that they would do this flight very often together. So he came in and he asked, he realized that this was not the normal crew. Well, they had taken all the flight attendants on a reschedule, and they sent them somewhere else. And they sent a different crew. Of course, it's a younger crew. And they said, or he walked in, he grabbed a whole stack of bananas and to eat, on the trip, it's a long trip, right? A lot of bananas. And the flight attendant told him, hey, Captain, those are for the first class passengers. Those aren't for you. And he says, I'm the captain. I'm taking the bananas. And so he takes he just takes him anyway. The flight attendant writes him up for creating a hostile work environment. He gets a call from the chief pilot's office, but he'd never been called from the chief pilot's office in the 35 years he'd been flying for Delta Airlines, right? He gets a call from the chief pilot's office. He thought it was his buddy. And so his buddy was not calling him. It was the real chief pilot, but he didn't know that. So he kept hanging up on him going, dude, this is not funny. Like this is my off day. Leave me alone. You know, I'm trying to do something. And finally he says, this is land chief pilot and you will not hang up again. So he's like, oh, okay. So sorry. I really thought you were my buddy playing a joke. He goes, we need to talk about this flight. You know, you've created a hostile work environment. We're just going to let you know that please, you know, you need to refrain from doing this again. Bananas are for the passengers, not for the pilots. You have a crew meal or something like that. And he was like, oh my gosh, this is ridiculous. I've been here for all these years and this has never happened to me before. So then he ends up going back to the normal trip. They got the normal flight attendants. Well, word had spread. And so they found every banana they could on the concourse. They took all the bananas and he filled the cockpit up with nothing but bananas. You could hardly step in it because there are bananas everywhere, right?
Oh my gosh.
So I think that's the funniest story of a symbolization of like the old world and then the new world. These are the pressures that new pilots are working under, this PC environment versus the good old days where everyone just kind of laughed and had a good time in a safe environment, right?
Yeah.
So I get it, guys. I get it. And gals, I get it why you're like, I don't want to do this anymore. I'm tired of doing this. But think about this. You're flying across the world at 6+ miles per hour in a tin can. There's less than 1% of you that gets to do this for a living, which is so cool. Yeah. It's so cool. So it's a real privilege to be in the industry. And you have to think about that. We work with pilots from all over the spectrum on airlines. And I'd say the most angry people that we've worked with have been JetBlue pilots. The JetBlue pilots are just not happy a bunch. I don't know why, but I've gotten several phone calls over the years going, hey, you left the industry, you started a business. I want to start a business. Tell me about this. And I said, well, what do you want to start? Well, I don't know yet. I'm like, okay.
Just not be here.
It's like anywhere but here. And I was like, I have to give him a pep talk. I'm like, you have the coolest job ever. What's the favorite part of your job? And he's like, oh, you know, mornings and just kind of watching the sunrise or the sunset or the night flights when we're up high and clear night. I see the shooting stars or all the really cool things that are places I would never have gone my own, but ended up there. So think about the positive things about what you're doing, because for whatever reason, pilots can tend to be a negative bunch. I joke, and I've said this in other podcasts. A lot of pilots tend to be preppers and have prepper tendencies. They're not actually preppers, but have prepper tendencies, and they can be a little negative at times. But you know, just think about how hard you've worked to do what you do. Yeah. And now that contracts are paying fair wages, the benefits you have to your family going forward. Amazing. I mean, the things that you can do for even the next generation if you manage your money well. Yeah. We don't have too many pilots that hit the stereotype of four wives, all former flight attendants, and 25 kids around the world. We don't see any of those here. But for the good savers and the people that are really looking to benefit their family, I mean, what a great opportunity. Absolutely. So there's not many places you work where they contribute that much to your plan, 17, regardless if you do. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I know that was in place of the pension, but seriously. Wiser does 6% match, right? Not contribution match. That's right. Which is good. It's very generous. Grace and I were in a planning meeting last week and she goes, yeah, you get 17%. That's amazing. And trying to pet this guy up. And I was like, hey, you get 6. She's like, yeah, that's not bad. That was better than what everybody else is doing. So anyway, I digress with the story, but thanks for listening to that. So really, I think it comes down to this. You got to have a health insurance plan. Yep. Meaning not like literally a health insurance plan, but how are you going to pay for it? You need to make sure that if you do walk away, that you can support yourself off your portfolio. Yeah. If you just really hate what you're doing, perhaps having a side gig. I know we work with a pilot that flies as little as possible, and she's building her real estate practice, and that's her passion. Mm-hmm. That's her passion. I mean, that's how I built this. I flew at night so I could be here during the daytime. This was my passion. Yeah. I'm still passionate about aviation. I just don't want to get up at 4:30 in the morning to go pre-flight an airplane somewhere. And I don't like the cold. And I always ended up in the cold. If it was warm, I was not going there. So anyway, so have the healthcare plan. Make sure you can still use your travel privileges if that's important to you. Also, if you think you would return to flying, I've never been told this by a pilot because they all understand it, but let's just make sure we're all on the same page. You walk away from the seniority number, you go back, you're not getting that seniority number back. You have to start over as if you know nothing in the right seat at the lowest pay.
Yeah.
So it's not a good idea to walk away if you think you're going to come back. It's better to find a place to hide and work as little as possible.
Yeah.
While you figure things out.
Yeah.
And I held on probably for a little bit too long, but I stayed there because of healthcare. Healthcare is one of our biggest expenses at this firm.
Yeah.
And when I was just starting out, I piggybacked on my airline's healthcare.
Well, you have children too,
this.
Family.
Oh yeah, with the family,
yeah,
right?
Exactly.
Yeah. Even back then, it was gonna be $2,000 a month. Now it'd be double that.
Yeah.
So yeah, that if you're thinking about making a transition, try to do both for a little while to see how it feels, and at some point you have to pull the plug and make a decision on what you want to do.
But it is hard, when you're, before age 55, most of you have children. And so you're traveling and you are away from your kids. And then once they move out, then you can take a step back a little bit. It seems like sometimes life is backwards, right?
Yeah,
it's like when we need to spend the most time with our kids is when we're building our career. And that's so hard. But I think everybody faces that. And so...
Well, let's talk about the opposite for a second. Mm-hmm. So a lot of things that I've done is help people figure out if they should go to the wide body before they retire. So they're flying domestic, and then they go, hey, do I want to go to this bigger airplane to get bigger pay my last 3 or 4 years? And in our planning, typically, no, you don't need to do that.
Yeah.
And so it's not, why would you put yourself in a situation where you're further away? Unless it's just something I've always wanted to have this type rating. I've always wanted to fly this airplane. Then go do it.
Yeah. That's totally different.
Yeah. It goes back to the 80-year-old test. When you're 80 years old and you look back, what do you wish you would have accomplished?
Yeah.
Was it more type ratings? Was it flying something internationally? Or is it making probably the same amount of money if you picked up an extra trip, staying domestic, focus on your longevity as a human?
Right.
At least in my case.
Right.
I was like, this is not going to work out for me. I will be dead.
Exhaustion.
Exactly. So think about that as well. Is it's about quality of life usually, and unless you don't have enough for retirement.
Yeah.
If you don't have enough for retirement, which the guys that flew during my time, I flew in the worst time of aviation. We had September 11th, we had the financial crisis, we had furloughs all over the place. It was not a good time to be an airline pilot. So for the people of my generation, you should be caught up by now. But if you're not, then I would say, you plan to work till 65. You might be trying to find as much money as possible to fill up your coffers in your retirement account.
Yeah, just hustle for a short period of time just to make sure you're okay.
I think going back to, if you disagree with everything I've said and you said, I just want to be done, then let's set somebody up for that.
Yeah.
So if you want to be done by 55, you'd go through our retirement planning process. We would put 55 as a hard stop. Our software understands what private healthcare costs, so we create a line item for that, right?
Yep,
in retirement.
Exactly.
And what would you say the biggest thing people need to focus on?
They're spending. That's the number. I mean, that is when you say how much do I need to retire? It depends what you spend. So living within your means and saving wisely and investing.
Debt.
Yes, eliminating debt.
Because if you're debt free by 55, your spending would just be your utilities and whatever you want to do for fun.
Right.
And food, I guess.
Right. I mean, there's a chance that the mortgage may not be paid off by retirement, but as long as you can handle the cash flow to pay it off like shortly after retirement, because if you retire at age 55, it depends when you move, but hopefully you are able to pay it off, especially with interest rates where they are right now. Not that they're super large as they have been in years past, but they're still higher than we're used to for a period of time. And, we all have amnesia about that, and it's painful going from 3 to 7%. It's double, it's 3.5 to 7% is double. So paying off debt, definitely. But if you're in debt, that means maybe you're living beyond your means. Not mortgage counting, obviously. Most of us can't just outright buy a house, but maybe you are living beyond your means, and getting that in check is really, the biggest part of the plan is what you spend.
Sure, absolutely.
I mean, that's what drives the whole thing.
So yeah, I mean, that's true, because we have people who retired with less than $1 million 10, 15 years ago. They're still doing just fine.
They are.
Their costs of living is very low.
Right. So it really depends, if we get that question, well, how much do I need to retire? Well, tell me how much you spend, and I can tell you that. I mean, that's the biggest driver of that. Now, I realize when people come in, they're raising children at the time, and your expenses will change hopefully when children move out of the house. I mean, they're just it's expensive to raise kids in college and insurance and all the stuff, all of that. And so it will change slightly, but if you get used to a certain living, it's going to be hard to scale back. And so it really is dependent on what you spend. If your pay increases significantly as a pilot, and if you let your expenses level out at some point while it's increasing and saving and paying off the house and all of that, then you should be golden. Especially with the amount that's going in the retirement accounts between the employer and you, between the airline and you.
Yeah.
So
we had this big push when the market-based cash balance plan came out at Delta, I guess over a year ago now, almost 2 years ago.
Yeah.
That there was a big push for planning because people are trying to understand it. How does it work into their plan? And it's so cool to meet with those people now. I just did a review meeting yesterday, or I guess it was last week. And their overall financial picture was totally different, because we said, hey, we need you to go tackle these few things.
Yeah.
In this case, it was cleaning up some debt. Like, the debt is almost gone, and they have all this free cash flow now. It made me is like, this is why I do this. This is awesome. We're making a difference.
Yes.
So I would say that you are correct. Eliminating debt, managing your expenses, and then once you understand what your expenses are, and I'm not talking about, when we say budget, we're not talking about bare bones budget. Who wants to retire on a bare bones budget?
No.
But figure out what your lifestyle is going to be like, and then we can back into the dollar amount that needs to be in those retirement accounts or brokerage accounts.
Yes. Well, and the other thing too is just making sure, because if you do retire early, you're going to maybe be retired we hope for a very long time.
40 years if you're going to go that early. Right.
So it needs to last, but also if you have some sort of healthcare event, long-term care event, we stress test the portfolio and say, okay, what if you have a long-term care event during this 40 years? What does that do to the portfolio? You can always get long-term care insurance to help offset some of the costs as well. That is generally expensive. So, many pilots can what we call self-insure, meaning that if they have a healthcare event or a long-term care event, they just pay for it out of pocket on their own.
Yeah.
But what does that look like? And so, you have to take that into consideration too, which is important to do the planning up front to know that, okay, this is what it looks like if I spend this, but what if we have, a market downturn? What if, and we stress test all of that. What if we have a large market downturn and don't recover from it? What if we, have a long-term care event? So that way, and you can walk into it, even if you do retire early and incur those extra expenses in the beginning with healthcare, et cetera, that you're still going to be okay. And then you can just make the decision.
Yeah.
Whether do you really want to walk away from this or not?
Right. Yeah. It's, I think that'd be tough, but it's very doable, and you might have better things to be doing with your time, potentially things we haven't thought about.
Yeah.
Even, but
yeah.
All right. Good conversation, Shauna. Thanks for joining me on
Absolutely.
on this. We have some other episodes. 259, what pilots and others should consider 5 years before mandatory retirement. We have episode 234, pilots maximize your 401k contributions. And we also have a YouTube channel. You can go there. It's called A Wiser Retirement. We do talk about, we link to our market-based cash balance plan discussion. I think most people understand what that is. Why financial planning is different for pilots. It is very different for pilots. We have a little segment on that on the YouTube channel. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you guys next week.